Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Could I ask everybody to take their seats? We're about to start for this morning. Am I close enough? We'll just let everybody grab their coffee now and come to their tables. All right, let's get started. So good morning and welcome to today's session on opportunities in Asia Pacific. We're going to talk about the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, and we're also going to talk about the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement. It's my pleasure to welcome here this morning a number of very distinguished guests and visitors from all levels of government, and also colleagues who are joining us from overseas markets to talk about the agreements today and how they implicate companies in those markets. Today promises to be an engaging and highly informative session. So we're so pleased with the wonderful turnout here in Halifax this morning. This is a great group, so thanks for coming. My name is Christine Smith, and I'm the Director and Senior Trade Commissioner for Global Affairs Canada, the Trade Commissioner Service, and I'm based here in Halifax. You're going to hear a lot about the Trade Commissioner Service over the course of today's event, but we're here to help companies navigate the complexities of international markets and to help them diversify for success. We have Trade Commissioner Service offices in over 160 cities worldwide, including Halifax, and including 4 cities that are represented here today by my colleagues who have traveled from overseas. I'll be your moderator for today's session, so you'll see me pop up back and forth throughout the morning and into the afternoon. I'm going to keep us on time and make sure there's lots of time for questions. There's lots of great information today, so I encourage everybody to network and take full advantage of all the opportunities that you have here today. Today we're going to learn more about the CPTPP, and we'll hear about the opportunities in the markets that are represented here today. We will also have an opportunity to learn about the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement, which came into force just over 4 years ago. We have a great panel of experts here today to talk about the free trade agreements and the markets. We have a panel of experts to talk about government programs and services to help you, and we even have a company story to inspire you, so it's going to be a great day. There will be a pause mid-morning for coffee, and there will be a luncheon served just before the networking session this afternoon. The networking session will be a great opportunity to meet with service providers from government organizations, crown corporations that are there to help you to do business internationally. So I encourage everyone to stay on after the lunch. So please take full advantage today. Network a lot, ask lots of questions, find the people that can help you to grow your business through international trade. So before moving on with today's agenda, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the partnership that has brought this event here today. This event has been a work of a close collaboration between the federal and provincial governments under the Atlantic Trade and Investment Growth Strategy Agreement, which is part of the overall Atlantic Growth Strategy. This agreement is a joint effort through the federal government, through ACOA, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, and Global Affairs Canada in partnership with each of the 4 provinces in our region. Thus, I'd like to say a special thank you this morning to Nova Scotia Business Inc., who have done a lot of work in organizing this today, and it's due to their efforts that today will be such a good success. So, moving into the event. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you this morning our first speaker, Ms. Laurel Broughton. I know many of you already know Laurel. Laurel is the President and CEO of Nova Scotia Business Inc. She's a former lawyer, public policy expert and advocate who has served in the cabinets of both Kathleen Wynne and Dalton McGuinty. She is a leader with expertise in international trade policies, corporate law, and economic development. She joined NSBI as the president and CEO in 2015. Laurel, please take the podium.
Thank you very much and good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. Je suis très fière d'être ici avec vous ce matin. I want to welcome everyone here today and thank our partners and presenters for bringing their knowledge and expertise. You have quite a day ahead of you. And to our Nova Scotia businesses who are working hard to ensure a better Nova Scotia for everyone, thank you and welcome to the forum. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Nova Scotia Business Inc. is absolutely delighted to host this forum together with our partners, Global Affairs Canada, Export Development Canada, Business Development Canada, Canadian Commercial Corporation, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. We are pleased to be able to present today's forum and others like it to help Nova Scotia businesses prepare and strengthen business with the Asia-Pacific region. Today, we are going to talk about the opportunities arising from the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership and existing opportunities with the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement. More importantly, we're going to talk about the tools and knowledge to help you realize these opportunities. Today, you will get the chance to learn critical information to help you benefit from these agreements. I recognize so many of you in this room and know that you understand and appreciate the complexity of doing business overseas. But more importantly, you also understand the benefits of doing the hard work, increased productivity, faster growth, higher revenue. In other words, you are running stronger, more successful businesses because of your international trade. You and other companies across the province are producing goods and services that are in demand around the world, including in key markets that are being discussed today. And I know for a fact that some of you didn't just start this yesterday. Let me give you just a few examples of your colleagues and who is in the room today. For over 30 years, the largest jam producer in Japan, Aihoda, has been buying wild blueberries from Nova Scotia. Oxford Frozen Foods has been strengthening this relationship for over 3 decades. Businesses across all sectors, including professional services, technology, seafood, agri-food, and beverage, are investing in exploring these markets. These are the reasons we have sessions like today, to help Nova Scotia businesses not only build the confidence to start exporting, but find greater success in their exporting. As a province, our prosperity is driven by businesses that have the understanding and confidence to expand into new markets. Take Halifax-based Kinduct Technologies, for example. The human performance data and analytics software company conquered the professional sports market here in Canada and the United States, and is now gearing up to take full advantage of growth opportunities in the Asia-Pacific region. And to accelerate that growth, the company has recently announced the opening of a satellite office in Perth, Australia. With an established and growing list of loyal clients here in North America, they say that they are ready to expand to serve and support high-performance organizations globally. At Nova Scotia Business Inc., our job is to lay the groundwork that helps you make the connections, understand the opportunities, and access the tools and resources. With new and updated agreements, we are working to develop workshops and information sessions to help better prepare and connect and build confidence in businesses looking to leverage these opportunities. We want to help businesses put these agreements into action so that they can expand their reach and increase sales to customers beyond our shores. Selling more is good for business, and this is good for Nova Scotia. We are an economy that must diversify, and we must think big from the start. Here's another example. 20 years ago, Benjamin Bridge was among a select few wine producers in the region. When they began production, they allocated a portion of their volume to open up export markets for the future. 2 decades later, Benjamin Bridge is now a world-recognized wine producer with their prestigious products found throughout the world, including Japan. Their global expansion has meant more jobs for Nova Scotia, with approximately 20 full-time employees and even more part-time work. Through the CPTPP and CKFTA, companies like Oxford Frozen Foods, Kinduct, and Benjamin Bridge now have unprecedented access to 500 million customers in these markets. And it's not just about access, it's also about labor mobility and knowing there is a strong climate of wanting to work together. Businesses in all sectors are able to compete on a level playing field with domestic suppliers for procurement contracts in these markets. These opportunities are building on existing trade partnerships that we have. On average, from 2015 to 2017, Nova Scotia businesses exported close to $300 million to the CPTPP and CKFTA markets, with almost half of this being seafood. Just recently, we were in Singapore, Seoul, and Tokyo hosting export cafes to promote Nova Scotia seafood exporters. We also know our ocean tech companies have sites on the region, and I see many of you here today as well. There's a tremendous opportunity for companies in the ocean tech and ocean sciences sector. For example, South Korea is one of the top 5 countries in the world with dedicated resource for ocean science, and Japan is in the top 3, maintaining more than 60% of the total number of research vessels worldwide. Last November, along with our partners at ECOA, we led an ocean technology trade mission to Korea and Japan. So trust me, we are continuing looking for ways to connect Nova Scotia companies and their products to buyers in key markets. I encourage you to visit our website to learn more about our trade missions across all sectors and reach out directly to members of our regional business development executives or anyone on our export development team. There's many of them here today and throughout the day, and they're waiting to hear your story and answer your questions. I hope that many of you have registered for one-on-one meetings with the Asia-Pacific trade experts to discuss market approaches and opportunities specifically for your company. These meetings will take place here in the Export Cafe after lunch. So once again, thank you very much for joining us today. We value every opportunity to explore new and existing markets that can help you grow your business and our economy today and for generations to come. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Laurel. That was great. Now it's my privilege to introduce the Honourable Jim Carr, Minister of International Trade Diversification. Mr. Carr is the Member of Parliament for Winnipeg South Centre. Prior to joining Cabinet in 2015, he was a dedicated business and community leader in Winnipeg for over 30 years. He is also an accomplished musician and has been an oboist with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra. It's a great pleasure to welcome Minister Carr here to Halifax this morning. Minister Carr.
Don't worry, I didn't bring my oboe. You know, the difference between preparing for a speech and preparing to play the oboe is huge. If you want to play the oboe, you have to work at it for weeks and do what we can with the embouchure. When you give a speech, you open up, think, and you read. It's always a pleasure to be here, and I'll tell you why. There is a real affinity between Atlantic Canada and the Prairie. I don't know why it is, but wherever I go, as a Manitoban in Atlantic Canada, I just feel at home. Maybe it's got something to do with proximity from Toronto, I'm not sure. It's a sense of just being a little bit closer to the land and the water, and it's kind of a brotherhood and a sisterhood that I've always felt is important. I want to start by sharing the condolences of all Canadians for the recent tragedy that hit the family of newcomers in your community. We all share in the sadness and the grief that's felt here over the loss of those children. And I also would like to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The story of the CPTPP, in a way, is a tale of two butchers. And that's where I want to start. The first butcher is my butcher. And I'm home every weekend and I do my shopping. And I chat with him, and he says, well, where you been? And I'll tell him, well, I was in Japan, I was in South America, I was in Europe. He said, what are you doing there? I said, actually, I'm creating jobs for Canadians. And then I have to explain what I mean by that. When we sign trade agreements with other nations, we're building bridges. And when those bridges are crossed by people, by goods, services, and investment, we create wealth. And when we create wealth and create jobs, it has impact in the neighborhood. So that's how I explain to my butcher why trade deals matter to the people of Winnipeg South Centre, because it creates wealth and jobs. And the second butcher is the butcher with whom I met in Tokyo only a number of weeks ago when we had the first ministerial meeting for the CPTPP, and the butcher was showing off Canadian beef. And there was a young girl, about 4 years old, who was handing out free samples of Canadian beef on a toothpick. And the Canadian brand is taking root in Japan. So the two butchers symbolize wealth creation, job creation, and the Canadian brand. And I always keep that in mind because in the world of international trade, with all of the acronyms, it took me a month to get CPTPP right, you have to always say to yourself, why are we doing this? What is the objective? And the objective, of course, is to create opportunities for our people. But you've known that for a long time here in Nova Scotia. The south side of Nova Scotia was the birthplace of Donald Mackay, inventor of the 20th century clipper Flying Cloud, a clipper ship that set the world sailing record for the fastest passage between New York and San Francisco. The so-called extreme clippers took hull technology to new levels, speeding up shipping times to Asia, if you were wondering where I was going with that. So this is a particularly appropriate location to talk about how we're making trade easier with Asia and the world's fastest growing economy. As a deepwater port and a gateway to land and sea, you are located in the middle of major North American, European, and Asian markets, and we now have a trade deal for all of them. I was chatting with the president of the Port of Halifax and how more and more goods are moving from here through the Suez Canal to spots east. And the potential that we are creating through these agreements is going to mean that your port is going to thrive, as will the Port of Vancouver, and I hope as a Manitoban, the Port of Churchill, and we are already seeing enhanced activity. But let's just pause for a moment and reflect on what our new Asia-Pacific Agreement means for businesses like yours. To start, it means access to 500 million new customers. Once fully implemented, this deal will eliminate 99% of tariff lines on goods. Over several years, this access will represent unparalleled opportunity. And Canadian businesses can now better compete in all of the countries of the CPTPP. Canada was built on trade. We are a trading nation and have been throughout our history. And today our entrepreneurs compete alongside the best in the world. Take CarbonCure, for example. It employs about 30 people and is based just up the road from here in Dartmouth. They convert polluters' carbon dioxide emissions, a key cause of climate change, into an environmentally friendly strengthening agent for concrete. Basically, they can turn a pollutant into a mineral that becomes permanently embedded in concrete. The technology was installed in 3 Singapore plants, and CarbonCure's first overseas project earlier this month. I had the pleasure of being in Singapore with Prime Minister Trudeau when the memorandum of agreement was signed between CarbonCure and Pan United, a very exciting possibility for an important Nova Scotia company. And now they're stepping up to drive into overseas markets, especially in Southeast Asia and in Europe. And they recently were named in the Global Cleantech Top 100 list. We are accumulating success stories from across Canada, and we want to know about yours because we are going to distribute them nationally and beyond. The best way of explaining how a trade agreement can benefit a company is to take examples of companies who have benefited from trade agreements. So if you have a story, we want to hear it. Canadian innovators, such as CarbonCure, have a lot to offer the world, and our Asia-Pacific Agreement is a bridge that will enable people to cross it. But to create more jobs for the middle class, we need would-be exporters, like so many of the talented individuals in this very room from diverse backgrounds and walks of life, so that you can take advantage of the new links between product and potential customers. The Prime Minister purposefully changed the title of my portfolio to Trade Diversification. Well, why? Because we know that 73 or 74% of all of Canadian exports go to one country, the United States. 99% of our exports in oil and gas go to the United States. So trade diversification is a strategic objective of the Government of Canada. But diversification means more than diversifying our export markets. It also means about tapping into deep wells of potential within our own borders. And I'm talking about women entrepreneurs, Indigenous entrepreneurs, and others who have felt marginalized from the mainstream of trade. Trade works when everyone benefits, yet only 14.8% of women-owned companies export. And that's why there has never been a better time to emphasize getting small businesses and women into trade. Also, in the support of goods and services, so that you know that the Government of Canada is here to help you find ways of expanding markets. In the fall economic statement, there was an announcement of $1.1 billion of investment into trade infrastructure and into the Trade Commissioner Service. And some of you will be spending time with our commissioners later on today. They will be enhanced through new investments, and so will Export Canada. By the way, do you know what it's going to cost you to consult with a trade commissioner from Canada? Zero. They are free to you. And they have experience and expertise, and they are literally around the world in 160 locations. And of course, we can't talk about trade in Atlantic Canada without mentioning the significant seafood industry here. Once the Asia-Pacific deal is fully implemented, Canada will have duty-free access for 100% of fish and seafood. But there will also be benefits for forestry products and 94% of agriculture and agri-food products too. For example, in Vietnam, I think that our trade commissioner from Vietnam is here. Yes, go chat with them later. A magnificent country. My wife and I spent 10 glorious days going up and down Vietnam. The people are so alive and stoic and full of life. Given the complexity of their history, it's a marvel to see and to behold. So in Vietnam, tariffs of 15% on fresh blueberries were eliminated upon the agreement's entry into force, and tariffs of 30% on frozen blueberries will be eliminated within 2 years. But it's not only about the numbers, and it's not mostly about the numbers. It's about the Canadians who benefit. People like Leo Van Dyke, whose parents Casey and Henrika started Van Dyke Blueberries after they settled more than 50 years ago. Leo says his parents were inspired by local wild blueberries, and as he has grown the business, he has adjusted to take advantage of new opportunities. Leo finds the Asian market is interested in food as medicine and medicine as food, and his blueberry juice has been popular as a health supplement that's high in antioxidants. And the Asia-Pacific trade deal will make it easier and cheaper for Leo's family to export to key countries. To build on the successes we've had in Asia, we are also negotiating with the ASEAN countries, the Association of Southeast Asian States, and also with the Mercosur nations of South America, Uruguay, Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil, which will add another 260 million people and a GDP of more than $3 trillion. But the most important part of these agreements is not the bridge that our countries have built together. It's about the people working on video game graphics for Japan, or water purification systems in remote areas of Vietnam, or traveling to Australia to consult with the mining industry. It is the people that power these businesses that bring deals like our Asia-Pacific Agreement to life. So the opportunities here are exciting and present, and a sense of urgency, really, because the trade advantages that we have now will not last forever. We were able to pass and ratify the CPTPP in the Parliament of Canada through the House and the Senate literally in record time. And because of the cooperation of the opposition and some great staff work by my Atlantic friend from Fredericton, Jamie Innes, we were able to take 2 tariff cuts, one at the very end of 2018 and one a few days later in 2019, and that never would have happened had we not ratified as quickly as we did. So sometimes you have to have a sense of urgency. And what this means is that we have a competitive advantage over those countries who have not yet ratified, but who are a part of it, and more importantly, those countries who aren't yet interested in joining the CPTPP, namely the United States. The trade agreements have been put in place to grant access to these markets, and now we have the tools available for you to make it all come to life. So I strongly encourage you to take advantage of the presence of our trade commissioners today so that you can understand how they can help you and help you now. Take Sue Siri from Halifax as an example. Some of you may know her. A force of nature who may be familiar to many of you from her days as a press or corporate photographer. But she saw the way social media was changing the landscape of photography, and she says, "I had to disrupt or be disrupted." That's a quote. So 3.5 years ago, she fashioned a prototype professional-grade photo booth in her living room from craft paper and cardboard to take high-end pictures at a fraction of the cost. And now she is CEO of Iris Booth, and the first shipment of her fiberglass photo booth is being delivered to Japan in April. She employs 4 people and says most of her business comes from outside the country. The Trade Commissioner Service has all that you need, all the tools to help you take advantage of all of this. And I think it's true to say that our government's efforts have put Canada at the center of a network of free trade agreements. We are the only G7 nation with free trade agreements with the other 6. And think about how meaningful that is as investors from around the world are looking at places to create hubs. Canada makes sense as a hub. I think this is an exciting moment for our country. At a time when protectionist winds are blowing elsewhere, Canada is showing through these agreements, through its leadership of reform at the World Trade Organization, that liberalized trade is in the interests of our country and all nations who play by its rules. This is about jobs, it's about growth, it's about a better life for our people. The moment is now. Together, let's seize it. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Carr, for that inspiring speech. I think that well sets the tone for our day. Thank you very much. I do realize that some of our guests have to leave for other appointments now, so I want to thank you for taking the time to be here this morning. And Minister Carr, we'll see you back at the Trade Commissioner Open House later this afternoon. Thank you. Okay, so moving on. Now we're going to hear from a local company. We're going to hear from Mark Wood, who is the president and founder of Ocean Sonics Limited, a leading-edge ocean technology company based right here in Nova Scotia. Mark will tell us about his innovative business and his experience in exporting to CPTPP markets. Mark.
Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. There's actually a PowerPoint presentation. Good, there it is. It's a delight to be here to talk about the trade arrangements that we have with CPTPP. I've been practicing as well, and I'm not as good as our minister is with it. But I'm going to talk a little bit about Ocean Sonics, about our experiences exporting, and also our thoughts on these trade agreements. Oceansonics makes underwater microphones called hydrophones. And we make what we call smart hydrophones. These are digital hydrophones that do important things with the data. And when we created these smart hydrophones, we wanted to focus really on three things. We wanted to make these instruments really reliable, the most reliable that you can get. We wanted to make them simple to use. Hydrophones are notorious for being messy and a pain to use, so we put a lot of effort into eliminating as much of that pain as we possibly could. And also we wanted to produce really good quality data. So we've made our instruments probably the most sensitive that you can get in the market, and a nice, easy way of getting the data that you need out of the instruments. Underwater sound is one of the most important tools we have for working in the ocean and for studying it. And underwater sound is critical for measuring the health of the sea. Oceansonics makes instruments that gather underwater sound, and we help people extract knowledge from those sounds that they're gathering. So we like to know for ourselves what's unique about Oceansonics, because that helps us market our company. So some of the things that make us unique are the fact that we're innovative. We're constantly innovating. We have a really smart team of people that come up with great ideas. We like to say we listen now. So we have competitors, and most of those competitors make what we call underwater tape recorders. You throw them in the water, you collect them later, 6 months, 6 weeks, whatever, and then you get the data. If you can collect that data in real time, you can make real-time decisions. You can change the way the instrument is set up. You can do different things with those sounds you're collecting. And also, we talk about listening with your eyes. So human hearing only goes from about here to here. Sounds in the ocean go from way down here to way up here. We can't hear those sounds. And in fact, even the ones we can hear, we don't process them very well. So it turns out that the best way to make sense out of those sounds is by visualizing. So we put a lot of effort into allowing our users to visualize those sounds. Oceansonics is a B Corporation. So what that means is we not only focus on the bottom line, on profitability, we also focus on our social interaction, both internally within the company and also in our community. And also, we like to consider the ecological effects of our business. So we're green. We're moving to a new building, which should be a high-efficiency green building. And also, a lot of our users are working to help protect the environment. And also, we local source. So what that means is that about 90% of the materials that we use to make our products are sourced in Nova Scotia or Atlantic Canada, but nearly 90% of our products are exported outside of Canada. So it's another example of being green by having local vendors. You're not shipping materials around, but the other benefit is you can develop relationships with those vendors. So where are our markets? We've divided our markets into 4 areas, 4 slices of the pie, and they're ocean science. So the best example of that is Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and the equivalent in other places around the world. People who are studying different aspects of ocean science, knowing where noise pollution becomes an issue for wildlife in the sea. Offshore energy, that includes oil and gas, pipeline leak detection, measuring the health of ocean machinery for oil and gas, but also renewables. So there are instruments made by Oceansonics on the Minas Passage turbine, and also they're being used by the other projects that are being developed in the Bay of Fundy. And also there are offshore wind farms in Europe that are using our hydrophones. Security, most people think about the Navy when they think about hydrophones, and they use our stuff, but security also includes things like protecting harbors, knowing when unexpected visitors come in, or if you have a power station that's on the coast, you want to make sure that there's no visitors approaching from shore that are swimming in undetected. And regulatory. In Europe, they have the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and that's a law that recognizes underwater noise or underwater sound as a pollutant. So measuring that and reporting those pollutants is really important. Also in North America now, if you build a new bridge or dam or whatever, you need to prove that you're collecting noise data on that project. Our geography. So why export? The reason why we exported or began exporting 6 years ago is because the Canadian market was too small. It's changed a little bit over the last couple of years. We have the Ocean Protection Program, and that's really given DFO and Transport Canada and Canada Parks a shot in the arm, but it's still a little bit small for our plans. Our plans are really to dominate the world, so we have to export outside of Canada. So we actually started in Europe, and our first probably 4 sales were European sales before we got our first Canadian sale. And why that is, I'm not sure. Maybe the Europeans are a bit more adventuresome. Maybe they're under more pressure to buy these types of products. And then we had sales in Canada. We had some strategic partners on the West Coast that helped us get our products accepted worldwide. And then we sold to the USA, and then we developed our markets in Asia and South America. But when I say developed, I don't mean we're done. It's definitely a work in progress. There's a lot of places where we don't have a strong presence yet, and places where we do have a presence, we want to develop more fully. So I was talking to Trade Commissioner in Korea, saying that we're pretty well established there, but I think there's a lot of potential to grow that even more. And it's through gaining understanding of that market that we can do that. Also, it's interesting that we have this trade agreement in place in Korea, because it's the one country where we're finding that it's actually pretty easy to ship our stuff. And in fact, we noticed that it was easier before we learned about this free trade agreement. It's like, well, that explains it. So how do you find new markets? We did it by using 2 strategies. So the first one is to pick exhibitions. So I've been in the ocean industry for about 2.5 decades, and I knew that the right conference for us was oceanology. And luckily, NSBI has some support for ocean tech companies who want to export using oceanology. Oceanology is a contraction of ocean technology. So all the tech companies go there to exhibit their products. People go there to learn what's new, to learn new methods. And also, distributors go there because they want to see what's new. It's also probably the best opportunity that we have for getting feedback from users so that we know how to fine-tune our products and how to come up with new products to help our users get better value from them. So we started off with 1 event a year, and now we do about 16 events a year. And some of those are similar to Oceanology and its sister Ocean Business, and some are very specialized, very niche, single-issue events. For example, the Ocean Noise Conference that takes place every 2 years in Spain. So with the exhibitions, I already mentioned these things. We're 16 events a year now, but it looks like we may be going to as many as 20 events a year because we have more staff that can go in and do that. So the other thing is distributors. Why would you use a distributor outside of Canada? The main reason why is because those distributors have contacts. They have existing customers, and so we want access to their contact list. We want access to their experience and those kinds of things. Also, in Asia, the cultural and language differences are really important, so we want to know how to communicate with these people. We don't want to make mistakes when we have meetings with them, so we rely on our local contacts to deal with the cultural issues. And also, it's important to have a local presence. So our users in Asia can contact a local person in their time zone when there's no holidays, during business hours, that kind of thing. So one of the things that we discovered over time is that when you get a distributor, you need to have a process. So the process, first of all, includes learning about the terrain, learning about getting your list of candidates, and then vetting them. And one of the ways to vet them is to use your trade commissioner. We also talk to other manufacturers in Nova Scotia to see who they use for distributors. And sometimes they say, no, don't use those guys, or these guys are great. But also we found that the best distributors are the ones that understand our exact market niche. So not necessarily an ocean tech distributor, but one that knows about underwater sound. And they're the ones that have the right contacts for us. We also learned that you need to have an on-ramping process. So you don't just sign an agreement and then say, okay, sell stuff. You need to get them up to speed. You need to give them materials. We need to give them training. And also big sales calls with those people. See how they do their sales calls, but also they get to see how you present your products or your sales team presents your products to users. One of the things that we learned the hard way is you want to start off by being non-exclusive. We expect that the distributors will earn exclusivity by being successful. And the other thing, and again, we learned this the hard way, you got to be patient. Things take more time than you expect them to, almost all the time. So why Asia? Asia is really interesting to us, as mentioned previously, because it's a fascinating place. I love going to Asia, the diverse range of cultures and that kind of thing. But from a business point of view, the reason why we're in Asia is because it has a huge ocean exposure. For the size of the countries, there's a lot of coastline. There's a lot going on in the ocean. There's a wide range of activities. And we have things like earthquakes in Asia that are really important, and our instruments are used for that. There's a growing interest in protecting the ocean in Asia, and that's an important user space for us. And also, in the last few years, there's been kind of a growing atmosphere of insecurity. And so people are now using sound to address those concerns. So some of the challenges of moving into a marketplace like Asia is getting market intelligence. So the Trade Commissioner is one channel, an important one, but also we want to get it from other users, other distributors, and other manufacturers who are working in that area. We want to know how our competitors are doing in that space. And we also want to talk to users about who the best distributor is for their needs. So on to the CPTPP. Why is it interesting for us? The reason why is because it takes away the barriers to allow us to export to those countries. So there are duties in different countries, and I can't tell you what the duties are in these places because it is so complicated and in some cases convoluted that it seems to change every time we ship something to a particular country. So it would be nice to know exactly how much something will cost our end user. We can give them the list price, but those prices can vary by as much as 50% because of all the additional costs. So if you have to pay a 30% total import duty on products, which we have seen, then the importer has to add handling charges, import fees, and that kind of thing on top of that. And so that makes us less competitive. It also makes it more difficult for us to tell a user what they're going to pay. So those are impediments that we'd love to see removed. The amazing thing about exporting it to Korea is that we could tell them exactly when they're going to receive their stuff. We've never had any delays, knock on wood, for shipping stuff to Korea. And so we're looking forward to having that experience in some of the other Asian countries. And also access. We believe that with the kind of the open trade, that we'll have opportunities that we can get to that we don't have now. For example, requests for proposals and those kinds of things with government agencies. So looking back on our experience with exporting, I would say that the thing that we want to be better at, the things that I would tell myself, would be to spend more time with planning and preparation and get the knowledge you need from multiple sources and use that knowledge to make the best choices. Also, you want to have a process for adding distributors. So distributors for our type of business are critical. That gives us that link to them. And by having a process, that goes much more smoothly. And again, you need to allow the right amount of time to take place before you develop that market. And one more thing I'd like to say is I'd like to finally say that this is a great venue for educating manufacturers and exporters, and I'd like to encourage the government, NSBI, and those organizations to do this more. Thank you for listening.
So thank you, Mark. That was a great presentation. Lots of best practices and lessons learned in there, so I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. So we've talked a lot about the CPTPP this morning, generally. I think now it's time to talk about it a little bit more specifically. And to do that, I'm going to ask my colleague Jay Allen, who is the Director of Trade Negotiations for Asia, based in Ottawa with Global Affairs Canada, to walk us through the agreement. Jay.
Good morning, everyone. It's always It's always a pleasure following Minister Carr, because we tend to have a lot of the same speechwriters, and he uses a lot of the same lines that I do. So I'll do my best not to repeat them, but I also want to point out that, that Mr. Wood, your presentation, it seems that you may have had an advanced copy of mine. So it's actually good to hear that some of the points that you raise are in fact the ones that we focus on as well. So, all right. So, do I have control of this thing? I do. Okay, so first, just to tell you a little bit about the CPTPP, we mention it quite quickly, and we don't always focus on, for example, who's in it. So there are 11 countries. In addition to Canada, there's Mexico, Chile, Peru, who we already have FTAs with, but then we have a bunch of new FTA partners: Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam. So what it does is, on the one hand, it really consolidates what we have with our other partners, with the existing FTA partners, and it enhances that relationship. But these new relationships with these new countries, this really opens up the broad world, the really dynamic and fast-growing world in Asia. So this, along with our Korean FTA, are cornerstones for how we're planning to open Asia to you. So this is really a fundamental agreement that we think is going to go down with both the NAFTA and the CETA, our European trade agreement, to really make the world your oyster. This agreement is comprehensive. It touches basically every area of trade that you can think of. And it's going to set modern and ambitious rules for this region. And one of the reasons why that's important is that this is such a dynamic region that these countries are also involved in negotiations with other countries. For example, some of them are ASEAN countries. So ASEAN tends to be a group of countries that may not be quite as prepared to be as ambitious as we are. So what this does is this sets a framework of rules that some of these countries are already operating under, so that when they do negotiate with these other countries, it helps to elevate their standards as well. And why is that important for Canadians? Is that even if we're not involved in those other trade agreements, we are a trading nation, and it's incredibly important to us to make sure that we are supporting and promoting a global trading system that's rules-based and that is not protectionist. We're seeing a movement in the wrong direction from a lot of our trading partners, but this kind of agreement and the enthusiasm that we see from some of our trading partners in it is really important. So before I go into a lot of the detail about the agreement, and I apologize, I will try to keep it elevated, I do want to signal that the FTA is just a tool. This is a tool like many other things, like computers, like a lot of other things that you have access to. It does not make trade happen. Trade happens because entrepreneurs like yourselves see opportunities. You take advantage of those opportunities. So this is one tool that's going to be in your arsenal, like the CKFTA. Mr. Wood mentioned that he didn't know why his agreements or his products were getting in. In some ways, it may have been because of that trade agreement. In other ways, it could just be the good work that the trade commissioners are doing. So these tools, and you're going to hear a lot about tools over the course of the day, are really here for you, and we are trying to make sure that you know about them. So what does the CPTPP do? I like to talk about it in terms of three themes. The first theme is that it offers preferential access. And we tend to think about preferential access in terms of trade in goods, that you have a price advantage because you're no longer paying duties. And that is certainly the heart of any trade agreement. Trade in goods is really key. But this does so much more than that. It's not just about preferential access for goods. It's about a preferential business climate, that you have access to these countries under better terms than your competitors. For example, your competitors from south of the border. You have a better investment climate. You have a better climate for the services that you provide. You have access to government procurements that other people don't have. And you've got access to dispute avoidance and dispute resolution procedures. So we always think about investor-state dispute settlement or state-to-state dispute where we go to the WTO, but it's more than that. You don't want to have to get to that stage when you have a dispute. We have, because of this agreement, we have entrees into the government. We have direct contact, regulators to regulators, experts to experts, so that if you have an issue, if you have a problem, we now have a specific mechanism to deal with those problems. So if you work through your embassy, if you work through the regional offices, if you work through your professional or your provincial offices, they can come back to people like me at headquarters, and we can go directly to those countries where we can actually talk about those problems. The second thing that the agreement does is it creates certainty and predictability and transparency. We know that these are important things for business people. You don't like to have questions come up where you don't know what the pricing is going to be. You don't know what the border procedures are going to be. So what we do is in our trade agreements, we try to negotiate, we try to lock these things in so that they really are focused on making sure that you know the rules of business. You understand, you have access to the rules, that there are not decisions being made behind closed doors, that you actually understand the rules of the game. And finally, the dialogue and cooperation is really an important one. As I mentioned, it's to help avoid disputes, it's to help resolve disputes, but it's also about regulators talking to one another so that as they're developing the regulations, when they're all commonly working on things, this gives them an opportunity to do that so that they can talk together, so that they can plan together, so they can look at what one country is doing, so that maybe they can stay out of each other's way if they're not going to regulate in the same area, or if they are going to regulate in the same area, they can take some of the same themes so that the regulations are not working at cross purposes, so that when you operate in one jurisdiction, you will have an understanding, you will have a coherent system, coherent system across the board. And so it's not going to lead to regulatory harmonization, but it will lead to regulatory collaboration. All right. So now we're going to get into some of the more nitty-gritty. And I will start this off by saying that there are too many elements of this agreement for me to talk about each of them. This is a 1,200-page agreement. I have 280 experts back in the office to deal with all the specifics. So you're going to get a very high-level approach here. And I apologize, because I'm not going to get into a lot of the specifics here, I will be around and I can help you with any questions. And hopefully at the end of this, there will be a few minutes where we can take some questions. But I am going to focus on a couple of areas, including goods, government procurement, temporary entry, intellectual property, and non-tariff barriers. And it sounds like a lot to cover in my remaining 15 minutes. But I promise you, I'm going to do it very quickly. So in terms of goods and rules of origin, once fully implemented, and I think Minister Carr gave this stat, 99% of tariff lines are going to be eliminated. Zero. Over 98% of our existing trade will be duty-free. Right now, we have $32 billion in trade with these countries. We expect as a result of this agreement that that's going to grow dramatically. In terms of figuring out if your product benefits, and this is where I had an expert with me on some of these other roadshows, you get into really some of the technical details, but the important thing is to know what your HS code is for your product, for the harmonized code for your product. Every single product in the world has an HS code. There's an international body that puts it together. So you have to know the HS code of your product. How do you figure out the HS code? You can work with a tariff, or with a customs broker. You can go on to tarifffinder.ca. The website's up there. It's a new tool that will let you know once you have the HS code, you can find out what the tariff is. And then you have to figure out whether your product meets the specific rules of origin. And one of the things that my goods experts consistently tell me is that our rules of origin for the CPTPP are amongst the most liberal that we've ever had in terms of ensuring that content that may not come from CPTPP countries can in fact still be included. So for example, for certain products, you can still include a fair bit of American content. You can include some European content for products going to Japan, for example. So there are really specific rules that are meant to be liberal, that are meant to allow you to continue sourcing products the same way that you do when you send them to Asia. Now, the important thing will be to work with somebody to figure out the exact rule of origin for your product. So it will tell you how much foreign content or whether it has to be wholly obtained. So again, really, really technical, but please do work with the trade commissioners. They can help with a lot of that. And if they can't help, they can come back to people like me, and we can certainly help. With respect to the rules of origin, one of the novel areas in this agreement, and one of the novel things that my counterparts who do this stuff are really quite excited about, is that there's self-certification for origination. So that means that companies, either yourselves or the importers, can certify that products meet the rules of origin. So that's really unique. In a lot of countries, you have to send the product there, and then the government makes the determination. And that really slows things down, and that can be really expensive. This ideally will make it a much smoother, much more, a much quicker process for you to use. So that should be a direct benefit to you. There will be audits in the various countries. There will certainly have to be some checks and balances in the system, but overall, as I say, my colleagues are very excited about this, and I'm not a goods geek, so I don't speak that language, but to me it sounds pretty interesting. You can also get advanced rulings. One of the things that each country has agreed to do is that they'll give advanced rulings, both in terms of what your product classification is, so what your HS code is, and also whether or not it's going to meet the rule of origin. So that's one of the important things that's available under the agreement. This slide is really, it's focused on agri-food and seafood products, because that's what we tend to ship to Asia right now. We tend to ship a lot of that. A lot of our trade is that. So those numbers are there, and we think it's really, really important that we highlight the benefits of for these products. I can certainly, over the course of the day, if you want to come and see me, I can give you some specifics on actual products and what some of the tariff reductions will be, but that's kind of boring. But I can tell you, it goes well beyond agri-food and seafood products. There are benefits for high-tech products. There are benefits for wood products, for paper products, industrial machinery, printed materials. So there are benefits across the board. So definitely, happy to talk about some of the opportunities specifically. Government procurement, that's another area where this agreement goes well beyond what was available to you. Government procurement is something that's often overlooked. These are the things that governments buy. Governments buy a lot of stuff, whether they buy paper, pen, bridges, roads, architectural services. They buy a lot of stuff, and it's estimated to be up to between 10 to 15% of most countries' GDP is stuff that the government buys. So for a lot of these countries, I'm thinking Malaysia and Vietnam in particular, the previous coverage for government procurements was really limited. In fact, Malaysia and Vietnam had never taken government procurement commitments. But you now have access to bid on things that they buy. So they will have to put tenders up, and you can bid on those. Each country each country has decided what they're going to put up. So not every single government purchase is going to be available. There will be limits. Beyond a certain limit, it's posted, only covered certain ministries or certain sectors, but some have gone really deep, including, for example, in Peru, in Lima, the regional government, some of its procurements are available. So if you look at if you figure out where the websites are, and we can certainly point you to some of that stuff, and each of the embassies in the country, the Trade Commission can certainly point you to where these are going to be listed. These will be opportunities that you have access to, so major, major opportunities. There are a couple of things that in the agreement are really important. National treatment, so that when you are supplying to these countries, you have to be treated just like a national. So there can't be any discrimination against you or your product. There's transparency, so that they actually have to publish. Each country has taken a commitment to publish, so that these things are online. So not just publishing that they're making this contract available, but also publishing who won and what the terms were, so that you can now see what it took to win that bid. And then the third element that it adds is there's accountability. So if you see that there's a problem with one of the tenders, if you think that there's something that was a little bit funny, a little bit untoward, there's now every country is required to put in place a process so that the tenders can be reviewed, so that you have access to something where if you think there's a problem, you can directly go to the government and have it resolved. By the same token, if you think there are questions there, please reach out to the trade commissioners, and you're going to hear me say this often, reach out to the embassies. They can help. They're in the country, and they can help to interpret the rules that are there. Temporary entry. So temporary entry is one of those things that again, tends to get overlooked in a trade agreement. That's why we wanted to raise it here. Temporary entry is about having the right person in the right place at the right time. So it facilitates movement of people, and it allows you or people who work for you to cross the borders to do business. It deals with highly skilled business people, so it's not just every worker, it's not just every laborer. It does not waive visa requirements or licensing requirements, but what it does is it removes specific barriers to entry. So things like economic needs tests, where governments might say that you actually have to pass, you have to show that there is a need in the marketplace before you can go in and serve your clients, or before you can go in and try to find new clients. One example that came up during the negotiations, Australia was putting in a new economic needs test for a certain category of business users. And because we were negotiating at the time, we hadn't even concluded the agreement. Australia said, all right, for the people around the table, we're not going to apply this economic needs test to you. So you don't have to face that in Australia. You just get to go in and you get to do the business. It also gets rid of numerical limitations of quotas. In terms of benefits, this is going to give you access to get your people on the ground. It's going to ensure that you have predictability. You're going to know how you can get people across the border. You're going to know who can go across the border. It's going to allow you better access than your competitors. People from the United States don't have the same benefit. They don't have the same access. In terms of types of things, there's really 4 categories of people that it deals with. It deals with investors. It deals with intracompany transferees, so if you have to move people back and forth within your company. It deals with professionals. And those professionals in particular are really important for small business people because those are professionals who are going in to provide services. They're going in to provide work that they do. And so, again, as I mentioned for some of the others, each country, because there are a lot of countries, they took different commitments. So not every commitment is the same for each country, so it's really worthwhile talking to the TCS, talking to the embassies to figure out which countries have allowed which movement. But again, really important because it allows you to be on the ground and to be there to meet with your clients, to meet with your investors, to understand your investments, and to provide, in some cases, after service for your products. Intellectual property. This is another one this is one of the most complicated areas of the agreement. This is 74 pages in terms of the chapter. It's a long, detailed chapter, so I'm really going to skim over it. But what it does is it really builds on and enhances what we've already agreed in the WTO. So a lot of these countries hadn't agreed to things at WTO or at the World Intellectual Property Organization. They hadn't agreed to commitments there. So what they've done is that they've now all agreed to to the baseline standards. It deals with nearly all types of IP, so it deals with patents, trademarks, geographic indications, trade secrets, copyright. It deals with all those things. And it sets the standards. It sets bare minimum standards that must be met by all these countries. And we know that one of the question marks about dealing with Asia has always been the protection of intellectual property. So this is meant to take them to a new standard. They are going to have to meet certain minimum standards in terms of making sure that their IP rules and procedures protect a certain level, that you have registration procedures that are understandable, that are transparent, that are predictable. And finally, that they provide a minimum standard of enforcement. So each one of them must allow civil remedies, they must have criminal remedies, and they must also have border procedures to ensure that, if necessary, they can stop things at the border. So this is really important for you as you're protecting your IP. When you go into these markets, your intellectual property, in a lot of cases, is the value of your product. So this is really meant to help you protect your products. I'm running out of time here, but I want to talk a little bit about barriers to trade, non-tariff barriers to trade. So one of the things that we know is that as tariffs go down, we stop thinking about tariffs as a blockage to trade. Really, at some point, they just become a pricing issue. But what can often really block trade is what we call non-tariff barriers. And so these can be all sorts of different things. And this agreement, at its heart, really is aimed at reducing these non-tariff barriers. We don't necessarily negotiate specific things, but we negotiate a climate. We negotiate an approach to rules. So things like technical barriers to trade, which can be things like product standards. We're building on the WTO agreement on technical barriers to trade, so that when you put a technical barrier in place, it has to be justifiable. You have to be able to justify that it needs to be there. There's requirements for scientific basis to sanitary and phytosanitary measures, so that countries can't simply just regulate something because they want to regulate it as a way to keep out foreign products. We also deal with customs and trade facilitation. This is the process for when your goods actually get to the border. How do they get across the border? And so we make sure that those rules are going to be transparent, that there are mechanisms for you to get answers on your products, to your questions on your products. And these are things that again, I'm going to go back to, your competitors in other countries don't have access to. So this really puts you on a much better, on a preferential, in a preferential position relative to your clients, to your competitors. And finally, this slide here has a number of contacts, and I believe these slides will be made available to you. But this is a number of places where you can go to seek some answers to very specific questions that you might have. So just to wrap up, this preference that we have and this preferential arrangement that you now benefit from, it could be very short-lived. We know that Japan has just recently negotiated an agreement with the European Union. We know that they're going to start negotiating with the EU soon. So with the United States. So these countries will be in the market eventually. So you have the preference right now. This is your opportunity to use it, to take advantage of the first mover position, to get in there, to build your client network, to build your supplier network, to integrate yourselves into the supply chains, to make sure that you are there so that when these other countries start getting involved, that you still have a prime position. So this really is your opportunity. The tools are available to you, and so please take advantage of them, and please don't hesitate to come up and chat with us over the course of the day. We are here, and really, we're very, very pleased to talk. Thank you very much. Sure, if you have time. Sure, if there's time and there's any questions.
We have a couple of roaming mics in the room, so if you have a question, just identify yourself and we'll get a mic to you. Karen has up here, please.
Thank you. Question. When you showed a slide of government procurement,
Yeah.
maybe a tiny bit of an esoteric question, but how does that work with the toolbox currently in place with CCC? Do they work together? So, CCC's mandate, and how does that work? Is it Advantage Canada or?
Yeah, it does. So government procurement, fundamentally, government procurement is about the government giving you an opportunity to bid on something they want to buy. The CCC, and we do have somebody from the CCC here who can help to answer the question, but the CCC they facilitate government procurement bids so that sometimes, they can help, they can guarantee, if I understand correctly, they back the bid. And please, John. Yeah, no. In fact, and I will say that over the course of doing a number of these roadshows, I've gotten to know a lot of the tools. In fact, I've gotten to know something about BDC and EDC and CCC, and these are organizations that I hadn't previously dealt with. So I've learned a lot from them, and I certainly encourage you to chat with them as well.
Thank you, Jay. So Jonathan McCauley, I'm with Canadian Commercial Corporation. We are part of the International Trade Portfolio. We're a Crown Corp that's separate from the Trade Commissioner Service, but we do work very closely together. The Trade Commissioner Service are basically our eyes and ears across the world, so we're quite close partners. CCC, what we do is we help Canadian companies that are looking to sell to foreign governments specifically. And what we do is in complex markets, that includes CPTPP countries, because we've been around since 1946, so there's countries that we've dealt with for a while. In complex markets where an open tender process isn't actually possible, that's where CCC comes in, because we're able to elevate the deal to a bilateral commercial agreement between two countries. And what we do is we sign on behalf of the Government of Canada, and we help those companies to sell a product or a service to any level of government. So that's where we come in. So it's sort of on the outskirts of the free trade agreements, but we're another solution to keep in pocket.
Great. Thank you, John.
Pleasure.
Any other questions? Oh, we have a question here.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Alan Dale from the University of Prince Edward Island. I work specifically with the engineering program, which is very industry focused with a global presence as well. Is there anything in the agreement that deals with academic institutions moving in and out of countries, working on projects, whether it be research or even at an undergraduate level where we're doing work for companies in other countries?
Yeah. So that's tough. Without having my expert here on services, I don't want to overcommit. But certainly in terms of educational exchanges, that would be covered by some of the services commitments that we have. I don't believe there's a specific chapter, there aren't specific rules on educational institutions, but certainly in terms of encouraging collaboration and cooperation, that's all in there. I believe that you can in fact use temporary entry, some of the temporary entry provisions to cross the borders, but I'd have to check on that. But that's one of those very specific niche things that you know I'd have to talk to my expert to get you an answer, and I apologize for that.
Okay, well, thank you, Jay. Are you going to start the next panel?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so thank you for that presentation, Jay. I've asked Jay to stay up for the next panel because now we're going to move into the markets talk, and I'm going to ask my colleagues that are here from the markets to come up and take their seats. We have Mr. Kyle Nunes, who is the Consul General in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. We have Mr. Arun Alexander, Senior Trade Commissioner, Tokyo, Japan, and Ms. Ladan Amarazizi, who is based in Canberra, Senior Trade Commissioner, Australia. Okay, so as they're getting set up, I'm just going to run quickly through their bios, just so you know who you have here. So Kyle Nunes, Kyle is the first panelist here, has been with the department since 2006. He has served as Director of Communications Services Division. He was Canada's first Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner in Bangalore, and he has also served as the Director for the Aerospace, Automotive, Defence, and Information and Communications Technologies Division within our sector practice at Global Affairs Canada in Ottawa. He has been Canada's Consul General to Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam since 2017. Secondly, we have Arun Alexander, who has been with the department since 1995. He has served abroad at the Canadian High Commission in Singapore and at the European Union in Brussels. In Ottawa, he has worked in the Trade Law Bureau and as the Chief of Staff to the Deputy Minister of International Trade. He has been in Tokyo as the Senior Trade Commissioner since 2014. And finally, we have Ladan Amarazi, who has been with the department, we don't know, you didn't tell us, good for you. She arrived in Canberra from Bogota previously, Colombia, where she was the head of the trade program there. She has also worked at Canada's missions abroad in Denver, Colorado, at the embassy in Santiago, Chile. In Ottawa, she has worked as the Deputy Director for Central America and the Caribbean region, and as a desk officer from Mexico. So lots of experience in CPTPP countries. Ladan has been in Canberra since 2017. So welcome to our colleagues who have traveled fairly far to be with us here today. Jay is going to stay on in case there are technical questions during the presentations. So what we'll do is I'm going to ask each of my colleagues to give an overview of the opportunities they're seeing on the ground in the markets that they represent, how they're seeing the CPTPP implicate into the opportunities in those markets, maybe some examples if you have some. And then we're going to have some opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So write down your questions. Once we have all the presentations done, we'll roam around with the mics and give you an opportunity to ask directly. So we'll start with you, Kyle.
Thank you, Christine. There we go. Earlier this morning, I heard Mark Wood say something that I hope you're all interested in, which is world domination. Because as a trade commissioner, it's really easy to work with companies that have the fire in the belly and really have that commitment to figure out a market and how to replicate that success around the globe. I've been in Vietnam since 2017. I first traveled there as a backpacker in 1997. And I have to tell you, this is what I want you to focus on with Vietnam is it's a country of change. And the change that I've seen in 20-odd years is massive. And even in the year and a half I've been in Vietnam, the pace of change keeps accelerating. So Vietnam has a history of making change at just the right moment. So in 1986, It had a regulatory change called Doi Moi, which in English would be the renovation, and which is the policy framework that opened up Vietnam to the world as a market economy with a single party communist government. And this change was, at first you wouldn't have maybe noticed it, but after a good 10 years, you really started to see the pace change. 2007, Vietnam joined World Trade Organization. And I guess one thing I want you to think about with Vietnam is that, like Canada, they have a single dominant regional player that they have to work around. And so Vietnam, like Canada, has looked at trade diversification as an approach to that. And so they're very open to international markets, very open to investment. And if you want to know, you want to read on that, just look at how quickly Vietnam ratified the CPTPP. Okay, so Vietnam is a country of a population of close to 100 million people. It's a youthful population. Its GDP growth has been sustained above 6% for the last several years and is projected to continue between 6.5%, close to 7% for the next few years. This is at a time when we're not expecting the same, we don't have the same level of confidence in China, Europe, United States. And a lot of it is driven by private sector investment, not really by government investment. And these are part of the reasons why we think the trend will continue. It's politically stable. As I mentioned, very open to investment. And it has a growing middle class that is growing in affluence. Of course, it's not without its challenges, and it's why we're happy to work with you from the Trade Commissioner Service. Transparency, corruption, fast-moving regulatory changes, which can confuse things, are part of the game in Vietnam. Now, in terms of Canada-Vietnam relationship, since 2015, Vietnam's been Canada's largest trading partner in ASEAN region. We have a comprehensive partnership that we signed in 2017, which raised our relationship across a variety of different themes. It's quite, as the word suggests, it's comprehensive. It covers everything from trade to people ties, defense and security, and a number of other issues. And our trade has been growing steadily, so we're at somewhere past $6 billion in two-way trade, and that's up from about 5.5% in 2016. The largest, Canada's largest exports here are basically in food, seafood, and we've been importing quite a bit of electronic goods and apparel from Vietnam. Vietnam has a very positive view of Canada, so we have a strong brand. We have 250,000 Canadians of Vietnamese origin, so our people-to-people ties are very strong. There's a few educational institutions in the room, and you can thank them for part of the brand, because basically Vietnam is Canada's 5th largest source country of students. I just got the latest numbers. There are 20,000 students studying in Canada right now. If you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have told you the number is 14,000. And when I started in 2017, we were excited because we jumped from 5,000 to 7,500 students. So if you talk to me in a year and a half or so, we'll probably be number 3, surpassing France and the United States. Canada's brand, while positive, it's not a brand that is super well known when it comes to doing business. So we've got some work to do. So I mentioned in terms of key opportunities that seafood and food products are the largest. I think the important thing, as we heard earlier, is that the agreement really does level the playing field against some countries that have an advantage over us. So Australia, New Zealand already have an FTA it's part of a regional FTA, and they got to 0 this year on the last lines. So they're going to be watching us as we gallop up behind them. And so I keep trying to use food puns when I talk about this, so I'm trying not to. And we do have an advantage over the U.S., who have not opted to be part of this agreement. Europe's not in, but they're working on their own agreement with Vietnam. So as the minister talked about earlier, there is a ticking clock, and I'd like to be working with you sooner rather than later. There is strong interest in Canadian food products and pretty much all goods. And I think that food safety is one area where I think we have an advantage. There's been some issues in Vietnam related to some problems with a plant from Taiwan that had polluted the waters in the middle of the country. And as the country moves into more and more affluence, what they put in their mouths is becoming more and more important. And Canada has a trust factor that we can't underestimate. Infrastructure is an area that if you'd asked me, and remember my theme is change, so if you'd asked me a couple of years ago about infrastructure in Vietnam, I'd say, well, it's pretty much ODA, Official Development Assistance dependent, and it's dominated by countries that use tide aid as a mechanism of trade. So the usual suspects, and basically with just little niche opportunities. The pace of infrastructure investment, while infrastructure investment has been invested in Vietnam, the demand is by far greater than what ODA will provide. Plus, Vietnam has moved up as a lower middle income country, so they're not getting the same concessional loan rates they used to. And they're starting to try to get their heads around PPP, and we hope to have a new law on PPP by 2020 if they stay on track. And in fact, in November, there's a delegation from Vietnam coming to Toronto to learn about our approach to PPP. In terms of the level of activity from Canadian companies, we've already seen success in engineering services, design, and building products. And just in the last year and a half, the number of Canadian companies that we've worked with has tripled. And we're now seeing about the same level of activity that we're seeing in countries like, from Canadian companies with the Trade Commissioner Service in Thailand, Malaysia, and the Philippines. ICT, here's another area of growing opportunity. Vietnam has been moving quickly up the value chain, so they've been quite successful in low value manufacturing, but more and more you're seeing interest in smart cities. Where I am in Ho Chi Minh City, which is the commercial capital of the country, they're very interested in the smart city approach, financial services, digital services. The challenge is Vietnam has underinvested in ICT. It's one of the most hacked countries in the region. And if they wish to, problems are opportunities if you have the right solution, right? So basically, if they want to take advantage of being a financial services hub, or if they want to offer advanced digital technologies, they're going to need to invest heavily in ICT solutions. They were slow to adapt 3G and 4G technologies, but have ambitions to take 5G much more quickly, and they want to be among the leading countries in the region. Clean tech is another emerging area. Even a year ago, I would tell you that investors were cautiously optimistic. If you're looking at solar, wind, I mean, there's the solar radiation levels in Vietnam are quite favorable. Wind conditions are favorable, but the power purchase agreement approaches were not quite attractive enough to foreign investors. That's starting to change. PPP is starting to become, as I mentioned earlier, more possible. And so here what I'd say is there's a lot of competition nibbling at this. And so if you're interested in clean tech, we want to talk because we want you to get a feel for the country and the operating environment and start looking at partners, because we do think this will change quickly. There's a number of other areas of opportunity that I think we're on that same slide basically, but I'll just tell you that in terms of I already mentioned education just soaring. Aerospace, Vietnam has ambitions to become one of the larger players in terms of movement of people and goods, and are investing in quite a few different airlines. Some of them are upgrading their fleets. MRO opportunities are going to be there. When I talked about the diversification, they've been looking at reducing dependence on tourism from certain countries that have been dominating. So they're looking more and more to bringing in Japanese, Korean tourists, and global tourists as well. And so that's fueling the aerospace industry. Life sciences, 95% of the medical devices in Vietnam are imported. While it's a youthful population, of course, they're aging as well, and they're more and more affluent, and they're looking to take care of their parents. And so not only are we seeing opportunities generally for the young, more health-conscious people, but in the aging care. And I'll just say lastly there on consumer products, you've got this young population that's looking to try new things and investing quite a bit in health and beauty products. Okay, doing business in Vietnam, I think, earlier Mark was talking about some of the key points that I would want you to pay attention to. Having a local presence, at least a rep is a good idea. Coming to the market quite a bit is going to be important. It is a country that relies on relationships. Getting a solid read on a yes/no is not always obvious to you, and so you're going to hear yes quite a bit. Mark made an interesting observation when he said, not to give exclusivity, but also not to give national coverage. So you have to really pay attention, and it varies sector by sector, but you really want to do your due diligence. And you're going to have to come in quite a bit, size up the market, figure out your approach to market, and then find out the right approach that works for you. And I think a good way to do that, of course, is to work with our team. We have 2 offices in Vietnam. So Alex George is my Senior Trade Commissioner in Ho Chi Minh City. And we cover most of the sectors that you would be doing business in Ho Chi Minh City. Janine Fiddler in our embassy in Hanoi, they actually lead on agriculture, so you'll do a lot with them. And they also lead on aerospace and defense. Okay, and we work as a team, so there's no wrong door if you knock on mine. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Arun Alexander. I'm the Senior Trade Commissioner at the Embassy of Canada in Japan. It's a great pleasure to be back in Halifax. I'm from Victoria, so another coastal city, so I always feel at home here. So, and thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know those of you who own businesses, how precious your time is, so taking a morning with us, we're very grateful for. So I'm going to do a presentation on Japan, Canada, doing business in Japan. My presentation, I'll start with an overview of Japan, basically. Then I'd like to discuss a few of the opportunities in Japan for Atlantic Canadian companies. Talk a little bit about the business practices and challenges of doing business in Japan, and then identify some of the resources available to you in Japan to support your businesses. So, Japan at a glance. Japan is the world's 3rd largest economy, and it's the largest economy in the CPTPP. You've heard a lot about the demographic and economic challenges that Japan has faced, but it is still a thriving economy with about $6.3 trillion in GDP, a population of about 127 million, and we do about $29.3 billion in bilateral trade with Japan. About 12 billion of that is Canadian exports to Japan, which are dominated, as you would expect, by natural resource sector. So we do about $1.6 billion worth of pork exports to Japan, and the Canadian pork industry has been absolutely amazing in adapting its products to the Japanese market, the Japanese taste. They like higher fat content in their pork, and we've adapted to that, and the success is really evident. Everywhere you go, Canadian pork is ubiquitous in Japan. Another key export is canola. The canola oil industry has also done really, really well in Japan, and the Japanese don't know it, but their tempura is fried in Canadian canola oil, and their tonkatsu is fried in Canadian canola oil, and it's everywhere. On the reverse side, about $17 billion worth of exports come from Japan to Canada. They are, as you would expect, mostly in the automotive sector, but they also do a lot of heavy machinery, ICT, and electronics goods. Another key sector for Canada in Japan is investment. Japan has invested about $30 billion, $29.6 billion in Canada, over a wide range of sectors, from agri-food to energy to seafood to, of course, automotive, and right across the country. And they're excellent investors. And with the recent announcement of the LNG plant in Kitimat, British Columbia, of which Mitsubishi Corporation of Japan is a major investor, we'll see the numbers increase even further, and we'll also see exports from Canada to Japan increase significantly. Japan is a democracy. It believes in the rule of law. It believes in engaging in friendly discussions with partners, which I think is very important. We share these democratic values. We share this respect for rule of law. So in the commercial context, if you have a dispute or a disagreement, there's an independent judiciary to help you adjudicate your dispute, which I think is very, very important. So opportunities for Canada in Japan. I talked about investment. And investment is a key sector that we work on in the embassy. Japanese companies have about 2.5 trillion, that's trillion with a T, in investable assets that they're looking to move overseas. Japanese investors are not they're very risk averse, they're not risk takers. And so they look for stable markets, stable both economically and politically, in which to invest their money. And Canada is an ideal location. So we've been working very, very hard to attract Japanese investment. As I said, Japan faces demographic challenges. About 350,000, the population declines by about 350,000 people per year. So that's like a Saskatoon disappearing off the face of the map every year in Japan. This creates key opportunities and also challenges. The opportunities are that there's a labor shortage in Japan, and so they've been looking to move their production and manufacturing overseas. And Vietnam has been actually one of the key countries to benefit from that. A lot of the Japanese aerospace companies are setting up in Japan. But this creates an opportunity, especially with Canada, which has access to the North American market, the Asian market, and the European market with CETA, to attract Japanese investors, Japanese manufacturers who can use Canada as a launch pad into these other areas. The other area is innovation. They've been looking to innovation to address some of the demographic challenges. This creates opportunities in areas like robotics, AI, and big data. These are areas where Canada has expertise, and the Japanese look to partner with Canadian companies with innovative technologies, innovative ideas to help them address these challenges. One of the areas that actually really surprised me is the Supercluster Initiative. The Japanese were very, very well aware of the Supercluster Initiative. Minister Morneau was in Japan recently, and he spoke about it. And he actually was speaking to a very well-educated audience. And we've had a lot of inquiries about the superclusters in the protein supercluster in the prairies, the AI one in Quebec, and also the ocean technology one right here. And so it's a really attractive investment and innovation magnet for Japanese companies. So some of the key sectors for Atlantic Canada especially, of course, there's fish and seafood. Japan is Nova Scotia's fourth largest export market, and you export a lot of fish and seafood and wild blueberries, as you heard earlier. I think we do about 3,000 tons of Nova Scotia wild blueberries are imported into Japan every year to make jam. As the population ages, they're also looking for nutraceuticals. These are functional foods which are delicious, but also help with health benefits. And so blueberries are seen as one of the key nutraceuticals, as is maple syrup, as is honey, as are Saskatoon berries. And so Japan is looking to import those to help deal with some of the demographic challenges or some of the opportunities that demographics creates. There's also opportunities in forestry products. The tariffs under the CPTPP will eventually go to zero for forestry products. So Japan is looking to import a lot of forestry products. This includes lumber, wood products, and an area that's seen a lot of significant growth is wood pellets. After the nuclear problems in March 2011, Japan had to look to alternative areas to get energy other than nuclear. And one of the areas that they're looking to is wood pellets. And I met with the Wood Pellet Association of Canada back in December, and they told me that their exports to Japan had doubled in the last year, so grown by 100%, from 95 million to 190 million. And so these create significant opportunities. On the fish and seafood side, 66% of tariffs on fish and seafood went to zero as of December 30th, 2018, and there'll be a significant drop over the next coming years. The tariff on lobster drops from 5% to 0% immediately. Herring roe, 11% to 0% immediately. Salmon will be 3.5% right now. Will go to 0% by year 11 in 2028, and scallops from up to 15% to 0% by year 11. I talked to Japanese seafood importers, and they say to me, Arun, our margins are very, very small. So even the smallest drops in tariffs makes a big difference in competing with other countries. Frozen blueberries, from 9.6 to 0% upon entry into force. So these are significant advantages that Canada has, but I have to emphasize that these advantages have a short window of opportunity. We're in there right now. We have an agreement that was actually negotiated with the negotiating leverage of the United States. The United States was at the table, and countries like Japan gave concessions to enter the U.S. market. Then Mr. Trump pulled the U.S. out of the CPTPP or the TPP and left us with all these benefits, but we need to take advantage of them. The Americans are already aware that they're behind Canada and the other competitors, and so they're already engaging with Japan to enter into negotiations for a free trade agreement. They're putting a lot of pressure on Japan to do it quickly because, as we know, the primary season will start in the United States in September, October, and Japan has elections in July, and so they want to move quickly to reach an agreement to make back some of the ground they lost to Canada and other countries in the CPTPP. So I can't overemphasize enough that we need to move quickly. I talked about fish and seafood, went through some of the tariffs there, forestry as well. Sorry, I'm a little behind. So some of the other key sectors. I said life sciences. The demographics in Japan creates opportunities for Canadian companies in the life sciences sector. One is in pharma, but also in medical products that can help alleviate some of the issues and challenges of an aging population. ICT. Japan is already the world's third largest ICT market, but they're looking to partner with companies. And I've talked to Japanese companies, and they've said to me, if we make software or games in Japan, they're made for the Japanese market. But when we set them up in Canada, you have a multicultural workforce. These are made for the global market. So they like to invest in Canada, and they have done so in Vancouver, in Montreal, in Toronto, and I also believe in Halifax. So there are opportunities in the ICT sector for Canada. Aerospace. I spoke with the labor shortages, and those create opportunities to attract investment here in Canada to produce for the global aerospace markets. This is providing supply to both Airbus and Boeing. They're doing it through other countries right now, but Canada is a great location. We have a highly skilled workforce, a multicultural workforce, and low labor costs compared to the United States. Ocean tech. Japan is the third largest shipbuilding country, and they're always looking to improve their technology for things like launch recovery systems, ice navigation, detection technology, and marine simulation. So they're looking to partner with Canadian companies in these areas. And finally, clean technology. I spoke about the nuclear issues that Japan has faced. The Japanese love nature, they love their environment, and they're very protective of it. So they're always looking for new clean manufacturing technologies. I always am amazed by Tokyo, because it's a city, the greater Tokyo area, of about 36 million people, but it's probably as polluted air-wise as Halifax. It's probably better than Ottawa or Toronto, and it's because the Japanese have made a commitment to clean technologies to help to keep the air safe and clean. So challenges in the Japanese market, and it's not an easy market. Probably the greatest challenge for Canadian exporters is the language and business culture. I'm always surprised by how little English is in Japan. I travel to China, I travel to Korea, and there's a lot more English in use. So if you're going to do business in Japan, you have to adapt to that language and the business culture. We can help you there. It's always very important, I think, to have interpreters because you never know if the person you're interacting with will speak English. It's a highly competitive market. The Australians are there, the New Zealanders are there, the EU just completed a free trade agreement and they're there very quickly, and so we have to compete very well with other competitors. They're demanding customers. The levels of service in Japan are through the roof, and so they expect to receive the same level of service from those they purchase from. So it's important to be able to provide them with advice, with a service almost 24/7. So with the difference in time zones between Canada and Japan, we need to be able to service our customers at all times. Long-standing relationships. The Japanese, it's a culture built on relationships, and so they will stand by a supplier through thick and thin. So it's very hard to dislodge someone who supplies to a Japanese company, but then it's very difficult to be dislodged when you're the one that's supplying to that Japanese company. So I just want to leave you with my final slide is our team in Japan. So we have our embassy in Tokyo, but we also have trade offices throughout the country. We have an office in Nagoya, which is actually Toyota City. So Toyota has its manufacturing and supply chains in Nagoya City, but we also have an office in Osaka. And Osaka is a city of about 22 million people with a GDP of about $800 billion, which is about the same size as the Netherlands or Taiwan. And so it's a huge city with huge opportunities. We also have offices in southern Japan in Fukuoka and also in northern Japan in Sapporo and Hokkaido. We work together as a team, so if you contact me or any one of the trade commissioners in Japan, we'll be able to help you, and we'll work with our own regions to make sure that you get service all throughout Japan. I think I'll stop there, and I hope there's some time for some questions. Thank you very much.
Bonjour à tous. Merci de m'avoir invité à être parmi vous ce matin. I'm going to continue my presentation in English, but please feel free to ask any questions you might have in French at the end of the presentation. So, burning question, Christine, you asked me how long have I been in the department. I know, drum roll, please. In fact, I've been in the department since 2001, if we include my time working at then CETA. So I have had a few years of experience in the department, but today I have come from the land down under. I'm not going to break out into song, although I'm tempted, but just show of hands, how many people have been to Australia? Okay, and keep your hands up if it's been in the December to March time frame. Yeah, okay, I understand. Hopefully tourism was part of your schedule, because being up here, I'm getting reacquainted with the cold and snow, but thank you, it's beautiful outside, so I appreciate you calling for that weather for me. I'm enjoying it. So why Australia? Before I begin, full disclosure, I'm maybe a little bit biased towards Australia and why you should do business there, because I married an Aussie. And so when I talk about people-to-people relationships, it's really worked out for me. So it might work out for you as well. But it's not just me who believes in Australia. Here's a fun fact for you. We've talked a lot this morning about the Trade Commissioner Service, but did you know that actually the first Trade Commissioner that was posted from Canada 124 years ago actually was a gentleman by the name of John Short Lark, and he was posted to Sydney, Australia. So voila. It's not just me who's going to tell you all the good things about Australia. Canada has known for a long time, way before the CPTPP and way before understanding other markets, that Australia is important. So we've been doing business with Australia for 124 years, and we've never looked back. During that time, we've really established our relationship is very long and established. We're both members of the Commonwealth, which creates some advantages for us. It's very diverse what we do. I mean, today we're here to talk about trade, but to understand the Canada-Australia relationship, you really have to understand the vastness of it. So whether we talk about defense or even in academic relations or culture, consular services, we have negotiated agreements whereby Australians will take care of Canadians where we don't have presence and vice versa. We collaborate very closely on the multilateral front. So when we're talking about the WTO and the rules-based order, Canada and Australia, we're right there together on the same page. And that really shows in the relationships and the trading relationships that we're trying to develop. We're members of the Five Eyes. If you're familiar with the term, it's the security relationship that is unique between Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the US. You might think Australia is far. It is far, but you might be surprised to know that we have direct flights with Air Canada between Vancouver to Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane. Qantas also has some regional flights. And speaking of Qantas, actually, when I think about where you are here in Canada and how easy it is for you to get to London, there are now direct flights from London to Perth. So another option to think about if you don't want to go via Vancouver. We have certainly shared set of values, and as I mentioned earlier, strong people-to-people linkages. We have very similar cultures, including our business environment, our institutions, our government and legal practices, and even the customer preferences. So who's done business in the US? Okay, so quite a few of you. So it's not that far of a stretch to think that you've gone into the US market, now you should be considering the Australian market. We work in the same language. They obviously have one of our 2 official languages. And it would feel like a very comfortable place to do business. So let's just take a quick peek at Australia and what it offers. It's made up of 6 states and 2 territories. The largest cities, so Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth, are actually coastal, which offers opportunities, and I'm sure being coastal here as well, you know some of the advantages that would be offered. It's very much like Canada in terms of its makeup, right? It's a big country with a small population, about 25 million, and it's very resource-based. Mining, agriculture, forestry, oil and gas. There's some manufacturing and some infrastructure. A lot of SMEs make up Australian businesses as well. And like Canada, it is incredibly trade-oriented. It depends heavily on trade for its prosperity. But when you're looking at Australia, you also have to understand that it has negotiated a lot of free trade agreements already and is continuing to do so at a rapid pace. It has over 80% of its top 15 partners with whom it has free trade agreements with already. And its main exports go to Asia and Oceania. I've put here just a couple of examples of Canadian companies, a lot of these tend to be some of the larger ones, who have already invested in Australia, but this list is nowhere near exhaustive, and we have a lot of smaller companies that have presence in Australia as well. In fact, Canada and Australia are major two-way investment partners, and the stock of Canadian investment in Australia is about $28 billion, which is larger than Canada's stock in China. In terms of how the CPTPP is going to affect that, that's one of the chapters that Jay talked about a little bit earlier, where in Australia we're expecting to see a lot of benefit. We do have a lot of presence even before the CPTPP, and what surprised me is actually Canada and Australia did not have a Foreign Investment Protection Act, so we did not have a FIPA, but now with the CPTPP we have a lot of those securities that come with having the investment chapter in the two-way trade deal. So that goes for both CDIA, so the Canadian direct investment into Australia, but obviously it goes for the investment that can come from Australia into Canada as well. But what's really important, and the reason why this slide is entitled Gateway to the Asia Pacific, is because my colleagues here talked about Australia as competitors on many fronts. But what I want you to think about is partnership. So global value chains. Australia has a really unique advantage of having been in the Asia Pacific region for a very long time. They have a free trade agreement with China. They have one with the US. They have one with many, many other countries as well. But point being, don't always look at them as your competition in the region. There are really great opportunities to look at them within the global value chain as your partners, as you're looking for your different models of strategy of going abroad. So the actual exports and imports are not huge. They're about $2 billion going in each direction. So so my numbers don't compare to my colleagues' numbers by any stretch. But again, in terms of pure tariff elimination alone, it's projected that there are about $47 million worth of advantages to be taken, to look into. So, CPTPP, first trade agreement between Canada and Australia, right? Trick question. Actually, little known fact, there is a trade agreement between Canada and Australia, Jay. And most people don't know about it. In fact, a lot of people, even that we talk to, don't know about it. But back in 1960, there was an agreement called the Canada-Australia Trade Agreement that was signed, which actually did reduce some tariffs on some goods, which are still in effect today. And I mention it because the thing with trade agreements is that one does not supersede the other. They work in tandem. So when you are looking at the different advantages, know that that one's out there. And perhaps some of you who have already exported to Australia, you might have seen reduced tariffs from the WTO tariffs and did not know necessarily why. It's because of this Canada agreement from the 1960s. So, quickly, just through some of the opportunities in some of the sectors that I thought might be relevant to you. In the ag, you can read what is there, but if you're in that space, anything that's agriculture or food related, just remember that it's about niche products. It's about the value-added products. Australians are willing to pay for a premium, but know how to define your value-added, and if it's organic or if it's functional in any way, there's great opportunity there. Craft beer, that's another area of growth. Quickly moving on, forestry, it's one of the sectors where we're expecting some good tariffs to be eliminated. It's an area that is expanding in Australia, and if you're in any form of advanced technology in the sector, come talk to me, because there would be good opportunities for you there. Life sciences, some of my colleagues have already talked about. And again, what the CPTPP offers, it's not just the tariff reduction, but some of the other chapters that will make it easier to track your business and to have mitigation measures. And innovation is something that is really big in the Australian rhetoric right now. So another area to look into specifically related to life sciences on that front. ICT, something that is interesting is that this is an area that has been growing significantly in the Australian market. And in fact, the current ICT share of Australia's GDP is 5.1%, which is actually greater than the mining sector. So we tend to associate mining a lot with Australia, but just to show the importance of the ICT sector, I thought that was an interesting one. So Nova Scotia does export already to Australia. Some of you might already be amongst the exporters, so lobsters, scallops, navigational instruments, paper and paperboard. In 2017, it was to the tune of about $36 million. And as I mentioned already, we expect that to grow. Quick word on clean technology. What's specific about the CPTPP that hasn't maybe necessarily been mentioned right yet is, and there's an environment chapter, which is something that's relatively new for Canada in terms of how it's negotiated, but it just goes to show how much value we're placing on the environment and bringing the other countries on board with Canadian values in that space. So it obviously creates a lot of opportunities for our clean tech companies as well as technologies are being developed and growing. Okay, I'm going to just conclude here by saying that we've got 2 offices in Australia. So we've got our High Commission in Canberra, but our main trade office is actually in the Consulate General in Sydney. We are sectorally divided, and you can see the different sectors there on your screen. We also have a trade commissioner who's actually based out of Brisbane, who reports to the Sydney office. But between Marc-André and myself, we would be pleased to introduce you to the right people and look for opportunities for you. So I hope you follow in John Shortlark's footsteps. Take advantage of programs such as Can Export that my colleague will talk about in a few minutes. Be creative in your approach to the region. And again, stressing the fact when you think about Australia, don't just think about what Australia offers in itself, but the access it has to the Asia-Pacific market. And like my colleagues, we're here to help and would love to hear from all of you. We're here all day and would love to have one-on-one discussions. C'est tout. Merci.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for those presentations. So now we have some time for questions. So who has a question? And we do have mics in the room, if you have. You want to save them all for later? No questions? Okay, well, let me ask a question. So Kyle, what do you think are the biggest challenges that you see for companies in the Vietnam, in that market that you've been seeing?
Well, I think probably first one that comes to mind is just lack of presence, on the ground presence in Vietnam. So if you're, I think generally speaking, Vietnamese people are pretty approachable. Language is definitely an issue. Setting up a business is relatively simple and straightforward. Operating it can be a different matter. But I think really it's too many companies come into Vietnam and some of the other large markets I've worked in, and I call it ice fishing. So you basically come in, hire a rep, walk away thinking that, wow, 100 million people, if I get a 1% slice of that, I'll be retiring early. And then nothing happens. And it's because you haven't built a relationship. And so I think for me, it really starts there, is come into the market, with both, not just your staff that are going to go do some of the homework for you, but if you need executive time in the market regularly. We're near some of the other markets that you'll do business in, so you can definitely combine your trips. Just don't tell them that you're coming in the tail end of a trip to China. Just come because you're coming to Vietnam. But I think that would be the top thing, is just its proximity and presence.
Okay, great, thank you. Liden, I'm going to turn to you and ask you, do you have an example of an SME that has come to Australia in a particular sector and done well? Like what would be a good example for an SME here in this room that they could kind of relate to?
Well, one was mentioned this morning in terms of their presence in Perth, and I'd love to know more about that company, actually. I didn't quite catch the name, so unfortunately. But some of the successes that we're seeing, without getting into the specifics of the companies themselves, are in the oil and gas. So as that's starting to pick up again, and mining starting to pick up again, we're seeing a lot of opportunities and successes there. And in the ICT sector, I would say those are the 2 biggest areas of growth where successes are happening very quickly as well. So.
Okay, good, thank you. And finally, for Arun, in Japan, you mentioned that Canada has a good reputation. So is that our main competitive advantage? How are we seen in terms of our SMEs that go there?
Yeah, Canada is viewed very, very favorably in Japan. It's got a very positive image. Unfortunately, we're known most for our nature, our mountains, our ocean, our clean air, and our Green Gables. And so I think we have some work to do to promote other aspects of Canada, especially our technology, our innovation, our startups, our ICT sector, that's not as well known. And so our priority at the embassy is to make sure that we support the industries that are already doing very well in Japan, especially agri-food, seafood, forestry, mining, but also to make sure that the Japanese are aware of the other aspects of the Canadian economy, the 21st century aspects of the economy.
Okay. So if we have no further questions, I want to thank our speakers. I know a lot of you have appointments with them this afternoon, and even for those of you that don't, take an opportunity to network and to grab them at one of the breaks today if you have further questions. So thank you. We're almost ready for break, but before break, we're going to take just 5 minutes to hear about CanExport, which is the Canadian government's exporting program for SMEs. And I'm going to ask my colleague who's here from Ottawa from the CanExport program, Tarana Bayet Bokhtari, to come and talk to us a little bit about CanExport before break.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. So I'm here on behalf of the CanExport program, which is the Government of Canada's largest funding program for small and medium-sized enterprises exporting to new markets. We've been around for 2 years. It was launched in 2016 as a pilot program with $10 million a year. In those 2 years, we've had some pretty great results. We've helped 1,000 companies with 1,400 projects. That's resulted in $376 million in export sales. And we've targeted a combined total of 110 new markets for those companies. But the stat that I like best is that companies who've received CanExport funding, 44% of them report having had success in their target market within a year of completing their project. So that's the practical stuff. But in the past 6 months, the program has undergone some pretty significant changes. We have changed our eligibility criteria to make it more accessible. It's now reaching up to 98% of Canadian SMEs. We are now also more flexible. Our guidelines provide you with a bigger range of projects that you can take on, and we are much more well-resourced. We received a total of $140 million in federal investment last year to promote trade diversification. So let's get started with the eligibility criteria. What kind of companies can benefit from CanExport support? We are looking for companies that are for-profit, incorporated, or a limited liability partnership. You need to have a business number. I feel like this is really short. A business number, and you need to have less than 500 employees and total revenues of between $100,000 and $100 million in the past 12 months. That's essentially it. So many of you in this room would be qualifying for the program. The types of projects that we fund are export development projects. So we don't cover things that are your core operating costs. So day-to-day activities, we want you to go beyond that to go into new markets. So we cover things such as business travel for 2 employees, including your daily allowance for hotels and meals. We cover participation at trade fairs, including repeat participation, because sometimes you have to go more than once to make contacts, or it was effective and you want to go again. We cover interpretation services, so when you're on the ground in these countries, for example, and language is an issue, we can help you with that. We also cover fees that are related to consulting a professional for tax or legal or business advice, market research, including setting up business-to-business meetings, and IP protection, certification fees. There's a range of activities that we can cover. All of that, you select the activities in the combination that makes sense for you in your market. You submit that to us as a project valued between $20,000 and $100,000. We will cover half of that, up to 50%. So we will provide funding from $10,000 to $50,000 per project, up to as many projects as you like, for a total of $100,000 per year. So this gives you a lot of flexibility, and now we allow companies to develop projects that are targeting up to 5 markets within the same project. So you could have, for example, you're hitting several trade fairs. Your project can consist of only trade fairs over a period of time, or it could be a strategic combination of, market research, trade fairs, business travel, all of these. You pick what makes sense to get the results you want to achieve in these markets. And essentially, we're a resource for you. Most of our funding is given out as a contribution, so all of our funding is non-reimbursable. If you meet the terms of your proposed activities, it's non-reimbursable, but a contribution means that you've been approved, you conduct your activities, incur the expenses, and we'll reimburse you after you submit your claim. But since December 2018, we also offer grants to select companies, so that's grants in advance of the activities, and that helps you with your cash flow. And I think for SMEs, we can all agree that's very important. So the two types of grants that we offer, one is for participating in a Government of Canada-led trade mission. So if you are a company doing that, and you are a member of an underrepresented group in international trade, then you can apply for a grant that's for a smaller value than the $20,000 project minimum to facilitate participation in those trade missions. Also, we offer grants for companies that have less than 50 employees, $25 million in sales, and who are either already clients of the Trade Commissioner Service or known to the Can Export program. Those companies are eligible for grants of $10,000 to $30,000. So the project is double that, and we provide you 10 to 30. So these terms are a little bit more restrictive than our contributions, but what I want to emphasize is that the program is evolving. As I mentioned, we've undergone some very serious updates in the past 6 months, and the next 2 to 3 months we'll have also other expansions on the program, so please stay tuned for that. And just consider us as a resource that's available to you, and as CPTPP opens the door to all these new economies, we can be the tool that gets you across that threshold. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tarana, for that. And she will be available in the Export Cafe this afternoon. So if you have more detailed questions and you'd like to speak with her, please take opportunity after lunch. So we're going to take a short break. We're due back at 11:30, so we have about 15 minutes because we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great. So have a coffee, have a break, and when we come back, we're going to move into a different free trade agreement, the Canada-Korea Free Trade Agreement. So I'll see you back after the break at 11:30. Thank you.